Okay, guys, before we jump into the podcast, this week, Ed Draper, the Sky Sports presenter, has flipped things around and invited me on his Sport and Life podcast, which is a belter. So we dive into lots of different interesting topics. But again, we thought we'd share it, multi-purpose, our content, so you guys can enjoy it and pick up all the golden nuggets to help you live your own version of an epic life. Right, let's jump in. Take it away, Ed.
Whole Man Academy. Because the world needs strong men. Whole Man Academy is changing the game for men around the world. It's for guys who want to live an epic life of fun and adventure, no matter what. We believe, deep down, all men want to go on their own hero's journey to becoming resilient, confident, fearless, and fulfilled. Listen in to be inspired by guys who don't settle for living a life of mediocrity. This is your call to action and call to adventure. Are you ready?
Anthony Asprey, welcome to the podcast Sport and Life. I think it's technically your second appearance, maybe a third appearance on mine, because we did one for Whole Man Academy podcast, and then we did. So we've shared content across the board, and I think we're going to share this on your platform as well. But good to see you, mate. How are you?
I'm very well. It's as we're coming out of. We talked just before we went on record about the weather, and I'm just looking forward to some sunnier weather because I'm kind of done with winter and going outside with fleeces on and body warmers and stuff. So I'm good, but I just need a little bit of sunshine.
Yeah, we're talking about the English weather being very much nondescript, like it sort of hovers between sort of mild and chilly in terms of most of the year. But it seems like it's been a sort of non-cold winter, but just one that's dragged in terms of a lot of wind and quite a lot of rain. So it's
we threaten to play tennis at some times, don't we? But when it's like this, I'm not going to. So at some point I'll embarrass myself and come over, and you can. I was going to say you can whip me, but that's going to sound like strange at the start of the podcast.
Well, I've just missed the call. Actually, I thought I was having it tomorrow, but I've got a pre-operation consultation with where I'm getting my keyhole knee surgery next month. So once that's out of the way, with get my meniscus sorted. I've been having like gentle knocks with my wife actually, which is just dollying it over the neck. But
right.
I need to get back fit. I did it, which a lot of people are going through this. I'm realizing I played football for the first time. I played once in lockdown, and I played once again 8 months later, and I had the wrong footwear. It was an indoor cricket hall, and I went in goal for the last 5 minutes and basically slipped, scrambling to get a rebound. And then my grip, I had AstroTurf on indoors, which I should have been wearing indoor shoes, but I didn't know it was the first time I played there, and it caught the surface, and then my knee and ankle went over the wrong direction over the top, and I ended up doing the ankle strain, which I thought was the main thing because I couldn't walk for about 10 days, but then transpired the knee was also screwed. And then I ended up getting an MRI last month, and they said that the meniscus, and obviously it's a knee specialist, so they're biased, I suppose, but the knee specialist said you need to operate because the meniscus doesn't repair itself, so you have to sort of basically spread it out between your bones, so it's not bone on bone. So it's just
how did it affect you? I was going to say, how did it affect you? Because we always say on the Whole Man Academy, you're one of the big things is your health is your wealth, and you can have all the money in the bank and have all the boxes ticked, but if you suddenly get injured or you're unwell, it can have a big effect. But how did you get on then with trying to get to work? Because I assume, could you drive?
No, not for the first sort of week or so. No. So I had to take time off work, which is embarrassing. And then the next month had COVID, not too badly, but again, at the time you couldn't go out of the house. So 7 days, I think 6-7 days until I tested negative. So I had to have time off. So I felt embarrassed about that. And then I've got to take a few more days off, another week off in May, which, I've done it when it's convenient for work, but you do feel a little bit embarrassed. And I find it very frustrating. I think it's a difficult balance between being peaceful with things and accepting what happens, but also not necessarily overly accepting being kind of decrepit as you get older, because I think you see some people who seem to embrace it, and I sort of still rail against that. But it's interesting the conversations you have, particularly with like older people in the street. They're like, "Oh, not as young as you used to be," and all this stuff. And you're like, "Well, I'm still going to play." It wasn't like I'm not playing in the Premier League. It's Zlatan Ibrahimovic is still playing at my age. It's Serie A. He's 40, so I think I can probably still play five-a-side. But
he's in good shape.
Yeah. Well, it's a consideration actually. Do think, do I go back and do this, and how do I do it? But I think I'll be a bit more thoughtful about where I play and what footwear I wear, and get back into, because I know my brother did his Achilles tendon. Actually, he's out for 6 months. He's on crutches for a long time, which is brutal. And then another guy's done his meniscus in both knees because he had gone back to playing football for the first time since the pandemic. And I think a lot of people are probably of a certain 30s and 40s now getting injuries that because they stopped. So I think the key is work your way back and don't stop if you can.
Yeah. And so that's one of the big things about when I had my collapsed lung when I was much younger, in my 20s. I appreciated going back to the football so much because I got kind of threatened with, you might not be able to play again if you don't heal properly. Going back into it, that first kind of match when I'd got properly match fit, like I had a newfound appreciation for football, like you wouldn't believe, because I'd missed it so much. But that was perhaps.
How did you have what was a collapsed lung from?
So I had a spontaneous pneumothorax, which means your lung just collapses. There's no particular reason why. I wasn't doing sport. I wasn't doing anything particular. I wasn't doing anything strenuous. Wasn't in an impact situation. What happened is that your lung had torn, and of course the air rushes to the outside of the kind of outer cavity of your lung, and your lung, like a balloon, deflates. But the problem is, the more you breathe, which is always helpful to breathe, the pressure builds up as if you're having a heart attack, or what? It's the same symptoms, because your left arm kind of goes numb. You can't breathe properly because your heart's being compressed. So then you have to have a really lovely, either a chest drain put in, which was for a whole week, which was nice, and let it slowly heal. Or when it didn't work after the third time, they did called a pleurectomy, which I can't spell, let alone pronounce. But it's a beautiful procedure where they deflate your lung and they scrape the outer wall of your lung, and so it bleeds, and they re-inflate it so it sticks to the outer wall of your lung. So you're basically, one of your lungs doesn't go up and down anymore. It just stays completely inflated. So I was just writing about it for our eLetter, actually, because that's the first time I had an issue with like body confidence, because suddenly I couldn't do anything for, I think it was roughly 6 months. Like you weren't even allowed to get out of breath for obvious reasons because your lung was repairing. So there was no gym, no exercise. And, I struggled with that because I was desperate to do stuff. So when I did get back to it, wow, I had a new appreciation for football and everything else.
Yeah. And is your lung okay now? Is it fully functional?
Yeah. I mean, that was in my 20s, but for quite a long time, I still had that in the back of your mind. It's like if you've broken your ankle or something, you don't go into tackles again properly for quite a long time because there's something holding you back. And I was really, for a while I played, but I was probably playing 80% because you were just a little bit worried. So,
They always say if you don't go into challenges hard, you're more likely to get injured as well, don't you?
That's it. Yeah. Yeah. So it was, but yeah, it's funny. It's like all things, when you have something taken away from you, you then come back and you really appreciate it.
It's going to be a balance, isn't it? Because James Golden, aka the Fitness Pros, he's been a regular guest on here and a mutual friend, and we've talked about it. He was playing football last year, absolutely loving it, I think, from a mental health perspective. And I think for me, it's the most immersive escapism that I still can get is, particularly indoors, because the ball literally doesn't stop. So you're in, there's no time to think about your meetings or, work tomorrow or that bill you have to pay. It's like, but at the same time, the downside of getting injured is pretty brutal. And if you do roll an ankle or twist a knee, you can't then do other stuff for 6 weeks, 2 months, whatever it is. Because I think he's had a tense Achilles tendon for a while, and he's obviously a fitness professional, so he's been anxious about that, I think, and whether he should play football or not. Because, like I say, my brother's Achilles went, and that's a brutal injury.
Yeah, it's a long-term one, and there's the problem also when you work for yourself. Yeah, because when I worked in the city, yes, I broke my ankle as well. But I still got crutches to work, and I sat with my foot up on my desk whilst I was I was a broker at the time. But, if that happened now, when you're trying to travel around and go to coaching people and mentoring people and etc., then you're in trouble. So people always say, it's great to work for yourself. And it is, as long as you stay fit and healthy.
Yeah, you take a lot less sick days than if you're staff. Although, to be honest, we're at staff the last couple of years. They don't want you to go in if you're ill. So it's kind of a win-win situation at the moment. But that's a really difficult balance as you get older. But it's like I say, I'm going to try and get fit. The doctors seem quite optimistic about it in terms of the recovery. So I think we'll work. But I want to make sure that, I kind of research which games I play in and what surfaces and that kind of stuff a little bit more before I jump into it. But it's a funny thing, is it, getting older? I was at a wedding actually this past weekend. My baby brother's wedding. He's just turned 30. Ed Draper, who's a singer-songwriter, is online at I am Ed Draper if you want to listen to his music. But there was a sort of broad spectrum of people, from young babies to older people. And it did, I suppose, like the injury, bring a sort of sense of carpe diem, doesn't it? Because you're right in the middle of that spectrum. You're looking at people and you just see the life force be so strong and then just drain gradually out of people. Not to be pessimistic, but it does make you think of seizing the day. Was your lung injury, did that impact your decision to leave the city in any way?
No, I mean, that was in my 20s, but I did have it once or twice where when I did injure myself as I was leaving the city, it was that thing of you were then in your 30s and you recovered slower. You know, and I remember tearing my rotator cuff, and I went to see a kind of specialist, and he was like, "How old are you?" And I think I was 34, and he was kind of telling me how much quicker I would have recovered if I was, you know, in my 20s than even in my 30s.
Yes,
let alone now being I'll be 44 this year. So you know, I do find everything aches a bit more, and you know, you can't do such intense stuff, especially when you've got kids and you know, business to run and etc. I just don't have the time to do such intense exercise.
Not sleeping, the recovery is like you hit on both ends as well, aren't you? Because your physiology is a bit slower, but you're also more in a more demanding situation. In your 20s, you could sleep for 10 hours if you wanted to.
Well, I don't know if you saw, I haven't even looked into it, but I saw some of the headlines where people had shared with the clocks going back, where you or you got going forward, where you lost an hour, that there was a rise in heart attacks, you know, across, you know, of something like 20% odd. And then when you get the extra hours sleep, then there's a decrease in heart attacks in that respect, which just shows you, I mean, for all of us, we all know having a good night's sleep, you wake up feeling refreshed and ready to go, and you have a crap night's sleep and you wake up and you're like, I just need like another half hour under the duvet and coffee injected in your eye.
Yes, yeah, I know. Well, actually, one of the things I'm on sort of permanent fixtures at Sky, which has been shifts, which has been sort of really life-changing for me. Although 3 of them are late, so I'm going to bed at 2 a.m. roughly 3 times a week. It's still much better than the hodgepodge of variety of shifts I was doing before. And actually, one of the dreaded ones would be that Sunday of the clock change when it went forward. If you're on an early shift, because ordinarily you'd be getting up between 3 and 4, but suddenly you're then an hour earlier, and it's that horrible feeling that you know you're going to have that stolen from you. So it's
it wasn't,
and the anxiety of whether your clock's going to work and things like that. So it's great not to be on those early shifts for sure. But yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you've got 100 podcasts up for the Whole Man Academy, which is brilliant. That interplay between sleep and challenging ourselves is always an interesting one, isn't it? Is that something you've explored quite a lot?
Yeah, and it's trying to find, I know people kind of talk about balance, and you know, especially I think as guys, or for anybody, whenever you do have kids, it suddenly adds a new dimension to it, because you can't be so, you know, beautifully selfish. I mean, a good example this weekend, my partner is going with the kids to London, and I've got to stay up in the Cotswolds because I've got so much to do, but I can't wait to have 2 days where I will be really busy, but I can do everything on my time frame and not have to kind of consider, you know, anybody else. And then I noticed that the Liverpool Man City match is on Sunday afternoon at 4:30, which could be interesting timing. But the podcasts have been a big one, because what I wanted it to do was find interesting men from all over the world that had, you know, either a motivational story or something really interesting, some kind of golden nuggets. But that meant it was guys from Canada, and, you know, we've spoke from guys from Nicaragua, from Canada, from the US, all different kind of places. So that adds the time zone situation. So sometimes you'd be doing a podcast at 9 o'clock at night, if they're guys in Australia or somewhere. And, you know, generally I go to bed at 10 o'clock these days. So when you're trying to maintain a good level of energy during the podcasts, and then it's 9:45 and you're thinking, I've been up since 5:30. You know, doing the podcasts is great fun. And the reason why I did it also, not just to provide value for guys listening, was also it's expanded my own network. And with the mentoring I do now, one of my things is I always say, I haven't got all the answers, and no one has. But now I know that, let's say a guy says, oh, I've got this issue or this challenge, that usually I can find someone who might have a better handle on it than I have. So you can reach out to, you know, pretty much 100 different guys around the world who you can cherry pick. Who do you think might have, you know, is it spiritual? Is it fitness? Is it health? Is it mindset? Is it something else? So the podcast's been good, but it sure does explode your network as well.
Is the 5:30 a.m. start, is that your self-imposed routine, or is that just the kids getting up at that time?
Yeah, it was born from, you know, years in the city, because I had to be in at 7 o'clock. Well, actually, I had to be in at 6:45. And I happily admit, when I first went for my interview in the city working on the European desk, I didn't realize that I thought you started at 8, not 7. I'd forgotten about the hours difference.
Oh, yeah.
So I sat in the interview and the woman said, "Oh, what you like with getting in early?" And I was like, "Yeah, fine, no problem at all." And then I said, "What kind of time do you get in?" And she said, "Oh, I get in about 6:30. And I was thinking, what a loser, getting in an hour and a half before the market's open.
Yeah.
And then during the interview, the light bulb went on and I was like, shit, like we have to be in at 7. So that meant for, 10 years plus, my alarm went off at 5:30 every day, whether you liked it or not. Some nights you had only just got into bed after being out with clients.
Wow.
and your alarm went off. And there was no, there was no working from home. There was no flexi time or that stuff. That was you are at your desk, or if you're not and you're late, you buy everybody breakfast, which is going to be expensive. If you arrived after 7:15, well, between 7 and 7:15, you bought everybody breakfast. So that was probably going to cost you, it depends how big your desk was, but some desks had 12 or 14 guys on. So do 12 or 14 times, X breakfast is expensive. When I worked on one of the other desks, if it was after 7:15, you bought everybody lunch. Now, we know lunch has become really expensive, and we'd get kind of lobster linguine from Leadenhall Market. There was someone that did the specialty, and it was £20 a serving. So even if there's only 6 of you on the desk times £20, that was a painful, expensive lay-in. So yeah, that's where it was, it came from. But I've struggled more with getting up when we had the kids, because our first one didn't sleep properly for a whole year. Our second one, who is now 2.5, still has never slept properly.
My 7-year-old's just started sleeping, sort of.
Yeah,
but yeah.
So you can, I would say that thankfully I've had a strong routine, but I developed our own kind of morning routine concept called the 1 day reset, which is what I do for companies, like talking to them kind of in the corporate field. And one of the big things there is you can have all these great strategies and tools, but if something throws a spanner in the works in the middle of the night, you wake up and you're like, I just can't, what can I do with the simple things this morning? Which is why it's the 1 day reset, because if you cock it up yesterday, it's not like, oh, just won't bother with this anymore. It's like, okay, let's reset again on Tuesday. What can I do for my morning routine? So yeah, that's been kind of golden for me, just to have that in the back of my mind, to know, the things are move, breathe, think and drink. So in the morning, can you do a little bit of movement, even if a few minutes? Breathing is your breath work. Thinking is what have you got to do that day? And drink being, your first thing in the morning isn't coffee. It is apple cider vinegar. It is warm water with lemon. It is just pure water. And just implementing those 4 things kind of changed the trajectory of my progress during the day.
Yeah, it has to be quite light, doesn't it? Because a routine can be something that gives you structure and handrails, but can also be quite kind of crippling if it's like you say, life changes, and you don't want to be too stuck to it, because it can cause you a lot of stress on the home front as well. If you're like, I've got to do an hour workout this morning, and they're like, well, there's a baby crying here. It's sometimes not realistic. Yeah. Well,
that was I talked about this a couple of weeks ago on one of the podcasts. There was a great book written by a guy called Hal Elrod, which is The Miracle Morning, which I thought was great, gave me some really good ideas. But I think there was 7 kind of things he suggested you do. And I found that I was then failing. So I was getting about 3 or 4 of them done, and then just things were getting in the way. And it was a bit like the film There's Something About Mary, when the guy makes is it 7-minute abs?
Oh, yeah. The serial killer.
That's it, the serial killer, 7-minute abs. And I remember thinking, well, this guy's given me 7 things to do, but if I had to drop a few of them out, what would they be? And how could I implement that? And so I kind of went from the Miracle Morning 7 steps to what are the 4 that I could implement, and kind of molded around for a guy. How could they use that in the morning?
Yeah. How important has that been, just the evolution of speaking to people and sort of stealing little bits here and there that suit you? Because I was always keen to that. You'd hear this sort of, 5 a.m. starts are brilliant, but it's like, well, if I'm going to bed at 2 or 3, there's no point me getting up at 5 a.m. I'm going to be in absolute pieces for the rest of the day, because we know how important sleep is. So
it's the allowing yourself flexibility, because just like you say, everybody has, for some people have got kids, other people have got different working hours. So with the talks I do, that's one of the big things you impart, is that there is no one way, because, you and I have, because you've got a different schedule to me. I generally am in bed at 10, 10:15, nearly every night now.
So you're getting the rest you need. Yeah.
That's it. So it's easy for me to get up at 5:30, or even if you got up at 6, like I've still had my, between kind of 6.5, 7.5 hours sleep. But yeah, if I had a job where I was getting home late, and then you have to eat late, and then you shouldn't go to bed just after you've eaten, because your body will, Good example of that. A few weeks ago, we had we had some sunshine, amazing, and we were testing out our new egg barbecue thing. And being greedy, I finished off, the meat that the kids hadn't eaten. I had that, so I ate loads and really late. And that night, I laid in bed, and your obviously body's working hard to break down all the meat that you've had.
Yeah.
And I had a terrible night's sleep. I was boiling hot because you've eaten late. So yeah, it's adding flexibility, and is probably one of the most important things. Otherwise, you just set yourself up for failure.
Yeah, I've found with shift work actually over the last year or so, even though you can't necessarily control every night the time you're going to bed, now I'm doing lates and 1 day shift. Actually, I can generally have a 2.5 hour variation of when I go to bed. So I tend to go to bed midnight on a night off, and then 1 or 2 on a night I'm working. So it's not too different, but actually researching and putting it in layman's terms from what I understand from the scientists is that there are different aspects of our physiology have a body clock as well as circadian rhythm, and actually trying to keep that consistent. So I'll try and eat at 6 or 7 my main meal in the evening and just balance that out. I actually do find that when I do sleep, it's better, even though when you come home at midnight, there's always a temptation to have some cheese or whatever it is. And in the old days, before I was a dad, it used to be red wine and watch TV, but then you'd be up till 4 a.m. So that was a bad call. But yeah, just trying to kind of keep other things regulated if the sleep, which we know is a foundational element, but it's other things that does help if they're sort of regular, and eating seems to be a big one for your body.
The environment as well, and that's one of the big things. It was back in, where are we now, 2022. It was midway through 2021 we released our first kind of online course for men, and it had taken us ages because we'd kind of tasked certain people that were in the team with writing an online course for men and kind of setting out some good examples of what they should be kind of producing, and it never quite happened. And in the end, I realized I should have just done it myself, because I knew, I had all the basic kind of skills to lay out for people. And it was all about giving a guy more energy to do all the important things he needs to do in life. But one of those was, that morning routine, and about, sometimes the night before, if you were going to the gym, setting your gym kit out. Maybe you've prepped your breakfast the night before. Maybe you've just done a few things. It might take you 5 minutes, but the preparation the night before meant that it made your morning routine, easier to kind of accomplish. And I remember we released the course, and the first time, like, someone bought it, I was like, oh, this is cool. And then it was just nice to get bits of feedback, where guys would just say, hey, I found that really helpful, and now I get up with more energy, more focus, and more clarity. And you're like, how much is that worth?
Yeah. It's just how important is it to give ourselves time whenever we wake up? Because I find that I get quite ratty if because I get up at 9, half 9, suddenly the world wants you to be on call, but actually you need an hour just to get your head, because you become a better person after about an hour of just waking up and not looking at phones, not trying to organize anything or do something that someone else is doing at 9 o'clock because they've been up since 6:30, 7 o'clock. Yeah,
that the phones thing, and I know, again, we talk about it on the Whole Man Academy podcast a lot, because it is such a big part of our lives. And most of us are, I can't remember the statistics, but most of us are never more than a few feet away from our phones. I was reading an interesting one about, people can't be bothered. I can never be bothered to look at instructions. I'm just like, just give me it. And, when I used to get my Commodore 64 and Nintendo, you just plug it in and let's go. And my dad would be like, no, let's look at the instructions. No, just let's go. And I know when you look at the iPhone instructions or the warnings, it says, don't hold your phone close to your ear.
Really?
And the point there is that the Wi-Fi and everything is, to state obviously, it's not going to be good for you. And it's certainly not good for you at all, because of course you've got this constant, Wi-Fi surrounding us. And so many people are now, and I've found it, become kind of addicted to their phones.
Yeah.
They take them to bed. They sleep with them next to them.
The alarm clock, and
that's it. And one of the things we say in the course is about turning your Wi-Fi off overnight, and it's easier
on your phone or just in the actual
in the house if you can house. Completely.
Yeah.
And putting your phone on airplane mode as well, because when you think it's just there, or some people have it where they plug their phone in to charge it up overnight and they have it on their bedside table. There's some really interesting videos where I'm trying to think what the machine is. That's the kind of the size of a dry shaver, but it can measure the the output of like energy coming off of a device. And you'll see someone get their phone, and when they plug it in, the thing goes beep 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 beep, because it is producing a lot more kind of the signal. And of course people are sleeping with them right by their heads. And you're like, even if you had no scientific knowledge, you just say, do you think that would be beneficial or, detrimental to your health, without having to read the science spelt with a dollar sign instead of an S these days. Do you think that's going to be helpful? So it's all those little things we try and implement with guys through mentorship or our online course, just to do the little 1%ers that can make a big difference.
Yes, having those conversations. It's quite interesting. We were talking the other day, went out for a beer with a guy who was in his early 30s, and the guy's a couple of years older than me, I think 43 or so. But we were talking about how actually reflecting about smartphones and actually agreeing, because I've had some issues with one of my tires on my car. It's had some sort of problem with the alloy, and it's been a slow puncher effectively. Mm-hmm. So I've been stopping at 1 a.m. to fill up my air and stuff and all this. And I said, the best thing about the phone is actually the torch, isn't it? And they were saying, actually, they're actually agreeing that is, all the fluff and all the talk about apps and stuff, actually having a practical thing that when it's dark, there's a good torch on this phone. And it's because I think there is a debate to be had that some of the modern life isn't actually conducive to more productivity. And, it is scary, isn't it? That addictive thing. I think it's snuck in that you just, like a Pavlovian dog, you look at your phone and you think, and suddenly you catch yourself like, why was I looking at that phone? I don't even know what I achieved with looking at the phone at that time. And I don't even remember what it was doing in that instance.
But it's so, I mean, you have to take your hat off to the people that design it. It is so good for, my opinion. And again, if you think with 100 podcasts, a good percentage of those guys we talked about phones, or the guys that read our Whole Man Academy eLetter and then kind of email me back and we have a good dialogue. But I would say they're so good at, I could finish this kind of interview now and I'll be like, right, I need to message Ed, or I need to check his Instagram. And I'll go on it. So I know exactly why I'm going on it. But like you say, and then a few minutes later, you're like, how am I here?
Yeah.
What am I looking at? And I've, downloaded something, or I've looked at someone's profile, have you? Like, right, no, what was I doing again? And it's so good at showing you. I mean, as we know with the algorithms, it knows exactly what you like, when it should remind you, when it should send you notifications if you haven't looked recently, which is kind of scary, to be honest. So 2 weeks ago, we're home educating our kids, as I might have said before on the podcast, but I took our boys off to their kind of forest school and I left my phone in the car. So I didn't look at my phone. I looked at it once because I was waiting for an email, but I had about 6-7, I think, hours of not even having my phone. And it was so good.
Brain feels better, doesn't it? Yeah, it's like it just comes because you're in constant communication. I think that's the difficulty now, isn't it? So many platforms, as you say, so many direct messages, so many. I mean, WhatsApp for me, I find absolutely terrifying. Like you look at it in the morning, there's like 100 messages because there's sort of like it's almost like it goads people into just sort of stream of consciousness communication where, I don't know what it is, even the standard text message, you don't have the same sort of cut and thrust, whereas on a WhatsApp group it's like, and I said this and then I did that and then they've seen this news and it's like, whoa, I can't, and then but this isn't helping me. I'm consuming loads of text and I don't feel more connected to people necessarily. It's in person's best, and then a phone call, or then something like this is next best, and then
you said about WhatsApp, here's one of the differentiations between let's say a text message and WhatsApp. On a text, like on WhatsApp, when it comes up and says that Ed's online, so you've read my message and he's online and he's ignoring me. Why isn't? What's wrong with Ed?
You just want to leave the phone, like you say, just leave the phone so no one knows what you're doing. Yeah. So
I found myself, I'd see a message on the preview come up, and then I would think, I'm not logging on now because they'll see I'm online and I haven't got time to reply to their message. One of the this was months ago, but one of the tips I gave guys one of our events was be okay with like leaving groups, because, and that could be Facebook groups as well as WhatsApp groups and etc. I left my like Emma's family's side WhatsApp group because I was like, they're lovely people, but it's a load of bollocks that they're like, it's just backwards and forwards with just stuff. And like you say, in the morning, you'd be like, I've got like 75 messages and it's no relevance to me at all. So I was like, love you all, bye, and just get rid. And you're like, wow. And Facebook groups.
Yeah, it's like anything, isn't it? It's like sleep, like exercise. There's a curve of an optimum amount, and you could, if you're exercising 10 hours a day, you're probably going to break down and get ill. And similarly, if you're on every platform, multi-connected on Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, all these things, effectively they're just messaging. It's trying to crystallize those communications, I suppose. And I quite old-fashioned that we organize this on email. And actually, I remember there being a sweet spot where you'd have a laptop and you'd email people and you felt really connected, but you weren't always connected, which is quite nice. And I think it's important for your brain to, like say, come up with ideas, be creative, to switch off, be be connected with people you're with as well. That's a big thing, isn't it? Having kids, so they're always
Yeah.
remonstrating with you about looking at your phone and things.
Well, that's two things. I know I talked about it on the podcast last week. There was a good example of, I find myself looking at my phone when I've got the kids as well, and my partner will be like, "Put your phone down," and I'm like, "Yeah," and I'm not mindlessly scrolling because I use my phone for work as well. So when you're working from home, that's the problem, is you're never in the office and then out the office. You're kind of, there's that blurred lines. But I was sharing that I take the boys to football on a Saturday morning at Little Kickers, which is great, and but it pains me to see. I join in with the kids and they're all, we're all playing football and what having fun. And like, there's so many mums and dads are just sitting against the wall with their phone, just scrolling. And you're like, right, I bet if you stopped them all and said, listen, what are you actually doing? You might have one that might be having to reply to someone through work, but let's be honest, the likelihood is that 9 out of 10 people are just scrolling or, just looking
mindlessly. Yeah.
That's it. And it was funny because one of the dads was sitting behind the goal, and the kids, especially they're only 4 years old, so the balls are going everywhere. He was sitting behind the goal scrolling whilst the kids were taking penalties. And of course, one of the kids hit the ball and it flew over and hit him in the head. And I was like, that's someone up there going, try and pay attention to what's going on instead of just scrolling.
Yeah, not having it with you. And there's a sort of a problem of practicality as well, isn't there? And probably put on airplane mode would achieve this. But if you're taking photographs and video of family moments with your phone, the difficulty is then, like you say, it's very skilled at having an alert come up that says they've got an email or a message. And then you look at that and then you're taken away. So sometimes the old school approaches of having your own camera, or I said the other day, I put something on Twitter about, and it got quite a lot of traction in terms of people that interact with me, said, I go on a Wednesday morning and have an omelette and read a newspaper, like buy a physical newspaper and actually do it. And actually, because I feel really immersed in it, I can remember what I've read. Whereas if I'm flitting between sports media online and stuff, and I'm also then getting WhatsApp messages or whatever else, your thread of focus is so broken up. It's unbelievable.
That's I was reading something about ebooks the other day, only because we want to develop. There's 2 different kind of books that we want to write for the Whole Man Academy. One on morning routine, and one all about what we've learned from the podcast and the 100+ podcasts. But when I was reading it, it was like there was that massive rise of ebooks because they were so easy. But actually, there was an interesting amount of people that now, even for me, I quite like holding on to a book. Yes, it's a pain in the ass to transport it and what have you, but generally to have a book, especially with our kids, and we like bookmark it and he scribbles on it and he puts his post-it notes. When it's all digital, the fun kind of has gone out of it. It's a bit like when they take money away from, or cash away from people soon. Gone are those days, and which in my view people should fight against as much as possible, because once it's gone digital, there is no cash, there is no fun of you getting a birthday card and there's 20 quid in it. Or
it's too scary as well, digital, because you realize it's so painless, isn't it? That's the problem with it's financially, you can end up spending hundreds of pounds without thinking about it. Yeah,
because you just beep and it's gone. So that's one of the things I read a book about. We weren't even living here, so that's over 5 years ago. And this guy called Jim Rickards, who's a kind of fun, speaks a lot about the financial markets. And he'd written there very much about like the death of cash and how they will deliberately, slowly filter out cash, and what the problem a cashless society will have. But like I say, even just with your kids, just having them understand the value of money by they've got £1 and they can buy this. That's the little basic stuff that just gets kids started and understanding how money works.
Absolutely, yeah. You'd know on a weekend how much money what you could afford, and then it put into perspective what your parents were paying for certain things. And that's a really good point, isn't it? And you were talking about on the dystopian outlook as well. You were talking on the email about food shortages. What have you learned about that sort of situation?
Yeah, I mean, we wrote about it about 2 weeks ago on the Whole Man Academy eLetter again, and that goes out to hundreds of guys around the world. So it's interesting. I love getting replies back, because you'll have a guy from India, a guy from Uzbekistan, a guy from Canada, a guy from wherever. So you get some interesting insights. But funny, I was talking to one of our local farmers as well at the weekend. We were picking up a load of meat that we'd ordered and discussing it. And what you're seeing is that supply chains, and have been for a year and a half at least, have slowly kind of been broken down for various reasons around the world. And there's a great guy called the Ice Age Farmer. So he's called Christian, but he's on YouTube as the Ice Age Farmer. And probably for a year and a half, he just does great research on what's happened in all these different countries, and the kind of snowball effect of all these supply chains breaking down. What I love is, and the joys of the media, and especially like the newspapers with promoting fear. It's not new, is it? To know they do that.
Gets attention, doesn't it? I think that's how our brains are wired that way. Yeah.
It's a clickbait type thing, but it's so funny in the news where they say, the food shortages will happen because of what's going on in Ukraine at the moment. Well, that will have a small effect on it because Ukraine is a massive one of grains, and obviously there's food supply chains. But this stuff has been happening for like a year and a half, 2 years. So it's easy to look at customer service. Everybody blame crap customer service on COVID. And you're like, no, like at some point you've got to admit that you're just crap with your customer service on things.
The lowering of standards across the board is
that's it.
Yeah.
And just go, it's Ukraine or it's COVID. And you're like, well, it's not, is it? That's an excuse. So, what I think we'll see in the next 6 months is similar to what happened. Think back to 2020 with the toilet roll situation. Now, the toilet roll situation, it didn't really matter whether there was or wasn't, or even the petrol we had recently. Now, it wasn't that we didn't have any, it's that the media showed people that there was going to be a shortage. Perception. And whether you like, everybody ran out and got some, which created a bit of a supply issue. And then, but the interesting thing with those is they were short term. For a week later with the petrol, you went back to the pump and you're like, no, there's no queues, there's nothing here. And the same with toilet roll, within a week, they'd filled those up. But if you do your research, you'll see that, you've got farmers who are being encouraged to just retire and being offered cash lump sums instead of selling their farms on or continuing to farm the land, which
in the UK.
Yeah. I mean, it's been widely reported in the press. And so that's one problem, if you know what I mean, even over here. But you're going to see some interesting.
Why are they encouraged to do that then? Because it's cheaper to import, or has been cheaper to import?
It depends how far down the rabbit hole you want to go with it. But what it does do is it creates a shortage of food. And unfortunately, if you control people's food, you can control people, if you want to look at it that way. So that's why our local farmer, I mean, even in Cheltenham, just outside, you can find lots of different farms around. And it's very interesting talking to the people that have got kind of boots on the ground, as opposed to just reading, a magazine that tells you. I love kind of getting in and actually having a conversation. But what we said was, compared to the petrol issue, which is very short-lived, and the toilet roll issue, which is short-lived, this, I would predict, will not be a short-lived food issue.
And this is fundamental food like meat and vegetables. It's not talking about avocados or an exotic.
I think all of it, because you can't get, I mean, at the moment, some of the ports have got ships. When I went out to Singapore, trying to think how long ago, it's an amazing view as you drive from Singapore into downtown. On the left-hand side, you see all the tankers out there being moored. Now, at the moment, in different places around the world, you've got huge issues where when lockdowns were happening, it was some ridiculous restrictions that were stopping people bringing on the produce onto land and actually kind of, getting it on the dock. And that seems to have got worse and worse. So I would suggest, and I laugh because I did a talk a year and a half ago for a big company in London. And at the end, that was just during lockdown number 1. And they said, what do you, I love questioning, what do you see coming in the future? And I said, well, firstly, assume that there'll be a second lockdown. And if there is, how can you make life a bit easier for yourself? And then the last thing I said, and this was a year and a half ago, was start growing your own vegetables. Because even then I could see that this was going to snowball into something. So
it's a practical response as well to the anxiety, isn't it? Because as you're saying, that in a sense, we're doing what the media is. We're talking about something that's sort of worrying and concerning, but you can control something, an aspect to that, which if you've got the space, like we don't, but actually my father has, I think, 3 acre allotment now, which he's growing vegetables. And actually, notwithstanding the fact that when you actually think about it, it does save us money when he gives us a load of vegetables, even though it tends to be an avalanche of the same vegetable.
Yes, of course. What's in season? 300 apples.
And his loads of squash that have just multiplied and got everyone. But it's still, it saves you money, but it's actually, I think, for him tremendously rewarding to do that. So it's a kind of positive response to the situation.
Well, you've just said something interesting there about allotments, because that was a dying art. And I think I would predict in the next year, you're going to see allotments are hugely valuable. I mean, not just, oh, it's nice to grow some veg. I mean, I've got some food to eat.
Yeah.
That is one side of it. But also we spoke to someone, one of the ladies who we know through home educating, and she was saying about in her country before I think it was either Poland or Romania. I think it was Romania. She said so many of the women out there, it's just part of life that you grow things, you can things, you have things in jars, you pickle things, etc. But she said when she came over here, hardly anybody does it. And I've said that's because it's so easy, isn't it? You press a button, things get delivered, and people moan if their shopping isn't in the hours slot that they've, and we've done it, or you haven't got a substitution. But what I would hope is this will push people, force people to say, do you know what? We need to learn how to be a bit more, self-sustainable with our food and eat what is seasonal, as opposed to, I mean, we both said it. You said avocados. You'd be like, go to the shop and it would be December. And you're like, oh, there's no avocados. This is ridiculous. Where's the manager?
Yeah, where do they? You don't even know where they come from or what.
That's
what
it.
Is. Yeah.
So it will be interesting. Also, you said this is one of the common factors. People say, oh, I haven't got the space. And you say, well, actually, educating yourself on you don't need a lot of space to grow certain things, because you think upwards instead of outwards. We shared links on a Whole Man Academy thing, trying to put a toolkit together for men to know, not having much space isn't going to be a excuse. That will be, it's just inconvenient. But you will find if you've got any small garden that you can start growing things. So it'll be interesting. But I'd love to say I'll be wrong, but I will bet my bottom dollar on in this next year, you'll see people going, that's weird, there's not as much stuff on the shelves.
And would that be bad for us? It's interesting, isn't it? I think in a sense a little bit of struggle. I wonder, we've had this compulsion the last 100 years to move closer and closer to convenience, and online shopping I think is a bit of a false perception with that, because the thought of having to negotiate packaging and send stuff back and all that kind of palaver, I'd much rather walk to a store and still while I still can and try a pair of jeans on. Although, and I'm lucky because I live near the centre of town in Chelsea. It's a bit more convenient for me, but it's still, that for me is easier, I think, than doing online shopping. So there's a false perception, but I do think maybe a recognition of what is important, i.e. food, shelter, things like that we used to create, I think, a happiness around that, whereas that became taken for granted. And we had all these abstract concepts like how shiny your car is and how new your car is and how big your, whatever is and what street you live on and stuff like that. I think maybe the more convenient more comfortable life is, sometimes the unhappier. I don't know. Well, for men, maybe in particular, maybe it's different for women. I don't know.
No, I think do you know what you've just said? The other thing there about seeing as obviously the Whole Man Academy being predominantly men that we talk to, but again, 25% of our podcast listeners are female, or 27%.
Women are interesting. Women it doesn't really work the other way around, that men don't crave female sort of quote unquote content, but often women, I think, because it's a struggle to understand how simple men are, that I think it's illuminating, like, oh, it's, a man could be happy, and I'm a very simple man, but like food, shelter, bit of movement, there's very simple things. I don't really have a complex range, which you try and get more complex as you get married and have a wife and a daughter, but it's still very but women are quite curious about that, like understanding that.
You're 100% right there, and I'll tell you this brief story. I was asked a few weeks ago, there was it's like a Whole Man Academy, but a women's version, which is, and it seems to be more kind of mature women. I would say women in their like 35, 40s and upwards, but they were doing a big event up near Stratford, and they messaged me and said, we're doing a panel for men, and it will be, so women in the room, but we want 3 or 4 men to basically come on stage and just answer any questions that women want to ask you so they can understand men better. And I was like, okay, great. So I went up there, and there was, say, something probably like 40 women in the room.
Yeah, and it's also hard to generalize as well, because you're thinking, oh, I know this bloke who's different than me. But there are generalizations I think you can strive for.
And that was exactly it, where you go, there was a guy who was 60, a guy who was 50, I'm 40, and another guy around my age. And one of them has got grown-up kids, one of them I don't think has got kids, and we did. So it was a nice mixture of guys from, let's say, 40 and upwards. But wow, it was amazing, because they let all the women submit questions and anything they wanted, and they would say, right, can you just give us with an unfiltered answer? Just don't think, well, no, I better not say that because, they might just say what you have in your mind, which is always interesting. And questions like, I mean, the first question was, what's the big deal with oral sex?
Yeah, really?
And you're like, right, at least let us warm up a bit before we jump into things.
What, receiving it or giving it, or what was
and that's what the guy said. Well, could you be a bit more specific? Yeah. And we didn't all answer all the questions, but I kind of got that question then put onto me after him, and I was like, well, look, he's answered it well. I said, but done well, it's amazing, and done badly, it's not a pleasant experience. And the women were kind of laughing. But one of the questions,
sex being a very different thing for men and women, I think that gets more and more.
That's it.
It's a
they wanted to
biological
understand
necessity versus a sort of sexual enjoyment, which is crude, but it equates to a lot of things. Is that
That's it. And one of their things was about. They asked about if a man was happy with his partner earning more than him, which is an interesting one because I wouldn't mind, but maybe when I was younger, I probably might have been a bit put out by that because you're like, in my head, I should be the breadwinner and they're earning a lot more than me. So that was an interesting
I think it would depend if you were any good at caring, but my wife's better carer than me. So I think if she's better at both, it would be like, well, what? Yeah, that's a bit embarrassing.
So it came back to that where one of the really interesting questions was one of the women said, can a man ever really have platonic relationship with his female friends? And of course, one of the guys who was said, oh, of course, and etc. And I was like, if you really want to be honest, I said the reason I was friends with my girlfriends earlier was probably because I wanted to sleep with them. That was, and they were like, God, it's such good to hear your honesty. And I was like, well, that's I'm not saying all men are like that, but seeing as you wanted some unfiltered stuff. So that was really, I'd say it was lovely at the end. The woman stood up and she basically burst into tears. And she said, I'm not saying what, but she said, some of your content today is actually, I feel like it's healed some of my wounds of things that I've always needed to hear about men.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, powerful stuff. So
yeah, I know.
It's good for men to talk.
The readiness to cry. Yeah. And that's actually funny. The millennial wedding, my brother was in tears the whole time. We made a crack because one of my brothers had testicular cancer and he's on testosterone now. So and I was saying, could you give him some of that testosterone? Because his wedding it was just, in tears the whole time. My mum and I was like, wow, I only sort of get teary when I hear about kids dying or something. It's like not but it's a different it was a slight seemingly a change in some of the emotionality of men.
We used
to I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know, it's because stoicism sometimes I think is a decent trait as well, isn't it?
Yes. And that's our previous podcast guest Michael out in Canada, he'd said, and I hadn't thought about it like this, but he said, in his view, he said, you shouldn't be going to your female partner with all your little woes. You should find a group of men or a man that you can have these discussions with. Because if you're going to your partner and, saying, oh, I'm not working, I'm stressed about this. He said, in a way, she'll then feel like she has to step into her masculine and out of her feminine to try and kind of counter that and help you and deal with it. And he said, whereas if you can find your group of men and, I know with you, if you want to, you could reach out to me and say anything and James Golden.
And I think it's different as well, because I think, and this is probably part of the mental health culture, which is a little bit limiting. I was having a conversation for men, is this talk in itself, which is bizarre because we're talking on a podcast and you do a lot of talking, which is supposed to be healing. But I think what men want is someone to say, you won't necessarily follow it, but it'll be, try doing this, try doing that. Whereas with women, there's a sense that they just talk about the same thing over and over again. And you're like, well, no one's doing anything. What are you doing? There's no clarity. No one's written anything down about what the next tactic is. And it's sort of like, but that is the part of the mainstream mental health culture now, is that in itself is fulfilling. And maybe it is sometimes if you're really depressed, I guess, to hear something, but actually what is better is my father-in-law saying, you've messed up this bit of DIY. Here's what you should do. And actually I'll feel less stressed because he's told me that, or this is what happened to me at work, and this is how I handled my boss and things like that, which is, I think my wife's actually very practical on that side, but it's interesting that I think that's sometimes a gender divide where you actually just want someone to tell you what to do or give you options.
And I know, we've heard it from plenty of kind of, I've listened to a couple of kind of relationship experts where they would say, in general, men want to fix things and women just want to talk about it. And, it's what I realize even with my partner, and we talk about it with the Whole Man Academy, is sometimes your partner just wants to offload what's going on. She doesn't want you to go, right, let's get a pen and paper. Let's get a 6-step plan going on.
And it escalates into a terrible situation. And you're like, oh, it's just, what about this? What about this? And like, well, no, it's like, particularly with inter-family relationships, it's like, you know, ultimately they just want to air stuff, I think.
Yeah. Well, goes into the victim triangle as well, isn't it? Is you try and, you know, someone's got a problem, they tell you about it, and then kind of you go around and think, oh, I'll try and fix it for them. And they don't want you to fix it for them. So they have a go at you. And you're like, well, don't have a go at me. I'm just trying to fix it for you.
It's almost like, you know, say to her, like, if I have a problem with a family member, it's like, what should I do? What should I say? How should I act when I'm there? And it's almost like, this is something I can rehearse and practice. Whereas for my wife, it's just literally venting something that I don't need to solve or give her a tactic for. It's a different thing. And it's subtle. And again, it will vary across different men and women. But I think there are broad strands of how you miscommunicate. Because I remember someone saying to me, for God's sake, don't try and tell her what to do or fix. It's like, that's the last thing you can do is tell someone what to do.
That it reminded me, if someone said now I had to kind of offer 2 bits of relationship advice to men or women, you know, because it's always good, as you say, for women to hear men's thoughts. One of them was saying to your partner, what I'm hearing you say is this, so that, because they'll go, no, that's not what I'm saying something else. And you're like, okay, sorry, just to clarify so I don't get it wrong, what I'm hearing you say is blah. But the other one was an American, he's an ex-police detective over in the States, called Craig Casaletto, who I interviewed a few weeks ago, and he does great like quick tips on Instagram for people and kind of men on how to do life better. But his thing was, if you said each morning, or it hasn't got to be every morning, but you say to your partner, how can I make your day a 10?
I think she's probably laughing if I said that out of the blue, but
because they'll be like, where's Ed and what have you done with him?
Exactly.
But he was like, you know, because often people are so busy, kind of, they think you know what your partner wants, or could be a colleague or whatever. But imagine saying, what might come up if you said to your partner on a weekend, listen, what can I do to make your day a 10? It might be, when I spoke to Emma, my partner, she's like, just empty the dishwasher, and like, if you could just make lunch, that's all I'm asking. And I was like, okay, I can do that.
Yeah.
And she's like, that'll do for me.
Yeah, don't have to change the washer on the plug, which is always a challenge for me, I think, or on the tap, which is too. That's a really good shout. And actually not airing problems, I think, because I think it actually be quite emasculating, can't it? Because you feel like you have to air it, but if you're not seeing male friends enough, you don't have that avenue to do that. And then you tell your wife, and I think whether they like to say it or not, and whether people say they want people to share problems, I think actually a woman tends to want you just to deal with it and get on with it, which is, you know.
Yeah, no, it's that. That's why I say with podcasts, which I love, you know, I've always said podcasts saved my life, because I might have stayed in the city if I hadn't have listened to podcasts, which got me onto Tony Robbins and personal development and et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, with the 100+ podcasts, like selfishly, I learned so much from the guys I interview as much as the people listening. And that's what I said. If with 100 guys, you took one golden nugget from every podcast, that's a book in itself. You know, 100 golden nuggets from the Whole Man Academy podcast is an ebook waiting to happen.
And what about the homeschooling? How have you found that, the balance between trying to work, trying to provide, trying to educate, trying to care?
Yes, good question. It's not without its challenges, and that's because obviously you're always, you know, one of us is always with the kids, but I say that you learn to adapt, because so our kids will go on a Monday to meet with the big group and go to somewhere to do something, like could be Blenheim Palace or go somewhere. Tuesdays they go to forest school where they're building fires and, you know, doing bow and arrow stuff and learning about animals and trees and woodland. Wednesdays they go to someone, and again a big group, and she's a music teacher, so she teaches them about kind of spirituality and music and nature and etc. And then Thursdays, one of them goes to one of our family members, and he helps them do gardening and different stuff like that. And then Friday, it's kind of a free for all of whatever they want to do. Yeah. But the biggest challenge wasn't so much them or us. It was helping people around you understand about homeschooling or home educating, because you're not trying to recreate school at home. Yeah. The whole point isn't having you sit down for X amount of hours. Yeah. That's it. So, you know, people often ask about, how will they socialize?
It's almost it's almost like sprint training homeschooling, isn't it? Because it's one or whereas, you know, in a general class, it's like a marathon because you've got 30 kids and the attention is split, but you can't give the same intense attention to one person for 6 hours.
Yeah. And look at great example. Even, you know, for anybody listening, look at when you went to school, assuming you went to school. I bet there was some things you couldn't stand. I didn't like science. I thought it was really boring. Whereas when it was media or PE or something like that, and I was, unsurprisingly, I was
arts and crafts was my worst. Making
that's
stuff
it, yeah.
Terrible at.
So when you're forcing a child to learn stuff that he's got no or she's got no interest in. So for Hudson, he loves woodwork and he loves that. So he's learning to count through measuring and building. But if you say, oh, we're going to sit down and do, to be honest, a lot of other stuff, his attention span is so short, then he starts messing around because he's bored.
Yeah.
And you're like, why am I forcing my child to, especially when you force the curriculum of, you've also got to ask yourself, who developed the curriculum? Is it to develop young entrepreneurs and young warriors as men, or is it to develop people that can be good worker bees and go out and work for someone else? I think we know the answer to that one.
Factory sort of age, wasn't it? Victorian age.
That's it. Yeah. And I have to be careful sometimes because everybody makes their own decision. We're lucky. We're in that situation where we can home educate our kids. Not everybody is. And especially if you're a single parent, guess what? You've got to go out and earn money. So it's an interesting one. But with the socializing of children, you take a class of 20 or 30 4-year-olds, they're not going to learn from each other. Whereas they will spend time with 2.5, 4, 7, 9, 12, 13, 14-year-olds. And the 14-year-olds learn how to nurture the youngsters, and the youngsters learn from the bigger kids who they want to emulate. And that's how they learn from each other. So it's funny watching people's, reaction when they say, oh, how's your son getting on at school? And I say, oh, he's not going to school. And they go, what? And he says, oh, we're home educating. And they're like, why? How? Why? Yeah. And you're like, well, how long have you got? But it's about working out what's best for your situation and your child.
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about that intergenerational connection even between kids, between teenagers and young kids, because that would have been sort of, I guess, just natural part of the process in communities when we lived in tribes and things like that. And a lot of it, what we're doing now with exercise and trying to get sleep again and things like that, it's fundamental things that we used to do very much intuitively and instinctively. But in modern life, we've had to unravel it and rent an allotment or do whatever we need to do to get to feel closer to nature when we previously were in it. We're a really weird species when it comes to it. And you've got a getaway coming up with the Whole Man Academy as well, because that's another thing for both the people going and yourself, is negotiating that time away from families, and an interesting balance, isn't it? And that balance between sort of self-care and narcissism, if it goes too far one way, doesn't it? Self-overlove.
Trying to find that balance. I mean, what we wanted to do with the Whole Man Academy was, everybody's got different needs, different budgets, different desires on how they want to kind of, sculpt their life. And, we started off with just the events, which were all very good. But of course, you could only have, 30 men there, maybe, or 65 men was the biggest event we did. But of course, a guy's got to be able to get to the event, get maybe permission from his partner, because maybe he's got work all week. And then he's like, oh, I'm off to this. So we then developed the online course, which meant that could be guys all around the world, which was great. But then we were like, well, what's the progress from that? And the next one was then mentoring. So I do kind of private mentoring with guys. We're just about to launch on Friday another course more about body optimization, like bioconditioning for men, and looking at your hormones and testosterone, etc., like that. And then the kind of the top of the tree for us was we call it the escape and reset experience, which is taking a guy who comes to my home for 3 days, either the weekend, and you look at his health, his lifestyle, his goals, his fitness, and it's like an intense, couple of days where it's just me and him getting shit done, but also having some time to walk, to exercise, a bit of cold water immersion, and really
leaving the toilet seat up.
He can do whatever he wants in that respect. But
it was funny, things like that when you get with your friends, you just realize how savage they are. I mean, a men's public toilet when you've got a daughter is just like, oh yeah, we're just animals. And it's basically like this ongoing tension between, I think I'm relatively civilized, but it's still
we'd like to think we are. Well, they get their own kind of private room with ensuite and entrance and all that stuff. Goodness. So it's basically the escape and reset, saying you escape from the daily rat race for a couple of days and then come out to the Cotswolds, and it is just fields and horses and nice walks and what have you, but also the reset experience of saying, okay, well, where am I today? I don't care what's gone on in the past, because you can't change that. Looking to the future, what can we do? We work a morning routine, you eat all organic food, and you just have that nice experience where you go, do you know what? I'm taking a couple of days for me instead of trying to juggle the plates of everything else in life.
Yeah, how important is it for us to a certain extent solve our problems in a sense? Because I think if you're a practical person, you say seek out these great podcasts, but then you can sort of find yourself blowing in the wind a bit, can't you? I think there has to be a sort of
just entertainment,
a filter process, isn't there, where you decide what works for you and what doesn't, and how you're going to approach life, and also a confidence about who you are. I suppose I mean, that sounds very corny and cliched, but is that one of the conclusions? You've spoken to 100 people on the podcast, but ultimately they've all got different perspectives, and you have to try and blend them all together to formulate your view.
Well, you just said confidence, and again, I literally this morning was writing an eLetter that will also go out because an additional one about even my own body confidence. Like I said, with when I had my collapsed lung, because I lost so much weight, and people go, "Oh, haven't you got skinny?" And I hated. I mean, I'd wager that most men never want to hear them described as skinny or thin.
It's quite, between skinny and fat. It's probably a close call, actually, isn't it? It's a hard. Yeah, it's at least fat. You've probably been having a good time.
Yeah, at least it's it's one of those things where it's about how it how those words make you feel. But we were writing on the eLetter again about confidence, not just for you, but it kind of resonates around you, because if you doing a job interview and you've got a guy comes in and he's got an air of confidence around him, you want him in your team. But if someone comes in and they haven't, maybe that's the deciding factor. So confidence can, it's like if you're going on camera, you want someone next to you, feels and sounds confident. I mean, is it Jim White was the guy who'd been, for so long, or I'm trying to think of some of the other guys that does like Soccer Saturday. But if you're that's it. If you're sitting next to those guys, you've got the feeling of their confidence, their ability.
Particularly for pundits, you have people come into the studio who aren't there all the time. They have to be very kind of
right. What's that like then? Because surely you get those guys, some are, if they're, especially the younger footballers, they're new to being on camera.
Yeah, there's an evolution, particularly on Sky Sports News, because often we're not that we want to see ourselves like that, but you could be, because audience-wise, Soccer Saturday or the Premier League coverage will get millions of viewers and we'll get hundreds of thousands. So there's a kind of incremental thing where sometimes you lose the best people, but you're nurturing them through. And it's very much, for a lot of these people, sink or swim intellectually. They have to work out what they're doing, because a lot of it's TV on radio, TV or radio on TV. So describing things the viewer can't see. So you have to explain it to them, and then you're having to make them feel comfortable. And then, like some will thrive and some will maybe stagnate and not be for them. So it's an interesting process, but you have to try and just tease and coax them potentially through it. And that sounds disrespectful, but obviously it's a new environment for them. And being live TV, I think culturally there's a sort of excitement and anxiety sometimes about being in that situation, a bit like public speaking. So you have to be mindful of that. But that is it's an interesting one. I think giving feedback as well. I'm not someone that sort of is too judgmental. I think an interesting blend, because you've done the personal training courses and I'm doing the level 3 at the moment. And one of the things they do is a stress questionnaire is you have to give to clients. And it's interesting, the sort of what is right and what's wrong. It's about balance, because one of the themes in there was, do you always feel responsible? Do you think things are your fault? Should you adjust? And I think part of me thinks in a relationship, you should always try and do that. But then if you get too far down that road, you become too apologetic and it's too, you lack so that is interesting at work, at home, how assured you are, how flexible you are about things, but also how solid you are at the core. And I think that's an interesting thing, is how you balance all those things, because there's not an exact way. You can be like braggadocio and absolute about everything, and your way's your way or the highway, and you never learn and get better as a person. But then I think there is a sense of like, you have to have a little bit of assurance with a little bit of flexibility.
I think funny, you reminded me of something I read the other day, which was, or someone said, that the biggest thing we know is that we don't know anything.
Yeah.
The one thing I'm confident about is that I don't know anything. Yeah. And I would say, for most people, everything we know is wrong. I mean, look at health and how we've been told certain things are really good for you. And then certain drugs. And then you find out that actually, years later, they're like, oh, well, we made loads of money out of it, but we were wrong on that. So I always think it's like, question everything around you as well. But, if you can surround yourself with people who have some confidence, I think it rubs off on you, basically.
Yeah. And you take feedback and you put it through a bit of a filter as well, because someone might say, they might have an ulterior motive. They might, whether it's work or whatever, they might be wrong or they might be right. You have to sort of evaluate that. I think there's a bit sort of process. And I always say that to presenters coming through as well, because it's a very fickle, subjective thing. Some people will like you, others won't. But if they've got something constructive and tangible, like you're picking your nose every 2 minutes on camera and it's pretty off-putting, then I think that's something you can actually,
or swearing.
You don't seem to know any facts about rugby. It's like, well, I can research and there's things that you can actually take and construct it. But if someone says, I just don't like the way you look, it's like, well, there's not much you can really do with that, which sometimes you get bosses who would be kind of pretty much candid about that. So it was like, that's something you can't control. And something maybe you wouldn't want to change anyway. So it's that kind of, having that strength of character with that ability to learn, because you want to get better, but you also want to have a confidence to you, like you say.
I don't think can be many tests more than either doing public speaking or, and again, that meaning me doing kind of corporate stuff with companies, and or, putting someone in that spotlight for you, saying, okay, there's 10, 20, 30, 40,000 or, 1 million or 5 million people listening or watching, to feel yourself, that then they go, right, go.
Yeah. I know. But it's still funny. I think you get into a groove as well. And it's that, I know Tony Robbins has spoken about it, which you've spent more time obviously studying him than me, but that the dangers of autopilot, because I think once that anxiety goes, you can actually get into bad habits because you're not actually learning and you're not growing, because you're like a sort of an automatron where the light comes on and you do it. But actually you need to have a little bit of that anxiety and a little bit of that awareness, which you'll always have in person with audiences. That's the thing, I think when you're doing public speaking, they're always there, you always see them. Whereas with a TV studio, it's a closed environment. So you can actually almost forget and not really think, am I being annoying? Am I being warm? Am I being convivial? That kind of thing, which you have to try. And sometimes when you're doing it for a while, is consciously remind yourself of trying to be better every time you go live.
That's what I found, since lockdowns happened. I'd started kind of doing talks for companies, and then of course it all got switched to online. And, I said countless times, but it's all very well, but it's just not the same as feeling the energy in the room and having feedback, because sometimes you just talk to camera, like literally your presentation and you is sitting in your room for a whole hour of you just talking, and you've got no idea. And sometimes you go, I wonder if maybe the connection's gone. Like, is it really even there? And then at the end of the hour, you kind of go onto the comments, and then people go, "Oh, thanks, that was really good." You're like, "Was it?"
Well, I've had 11:30 at work sometimes in the evening. You're just reading a story, and you suddenly have that out of body experience where pretty much the office is empty, and you're sort of you're like there and think, "Is this really happening? Is it going out?" And obviously it is, but you don't have that kind of that human interconnection.
Yeah, which is priceless. But we're getting there.
Yeah, well, mate, we've had a really good chat, and I'm aware that I'm probably ruining the homeschooling schedule at the moment as well.
That's all right.
Hey, it's been great to catch up. Quick, direct people to the Whole Man Academy as well, because I thought I was on the email list, but I had to re-sign up to that as well, because it was really
well, I can add you to it if you want to save you doing it. But I mean, we're on Instagram and Facebook, but if you just go to, I can always send you the link tree, which has got all of our stuff on it, so the mentorship, etc., etc. But if people just go to www.wholemanacademy.com, generally everything is on there, and some nice pictures of David Gandy as well if they need to look at them.
Oh, of course, the ambassador, David Gandy, who's a doppelganger of yourself as well. If people want to look you up, if they're listening to this podcast, they can.
He's about a foot taller, but apart from that,
yeah, he is. He's a man that sets a certain standard that we'll never get, but we'll keep trying. Anthony, pleasure to have you on, mate. Really appreciate it, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you, mate. Cheers.
Thanks for listening. Remember to sign up to our game-changing weekly eLetter that's read by men around the world. Sign up at wholemanacademy.com/movement. Until next time.